Mercury is the chemical element with the symbol Hg and atomic number 80, also known as quicksilver, most likely because of its physical appearance and droplet-like movement. Mercury was commonly used for thermometers, barometers, manometers, and sphygmomanometers. And if you are old enough like me, you might have seen one used in HVAC thermostat system at home, probably because they have a property of good electric conductor. Now, what would happen if mercury got into a living organism's body? There was an instance in Japanese history in the 1950s where cats were observed demonstrating strange like behaviors such as running around in circle and fidgeting awkwardly. The odd behavior was strange enough that it was given the name the dancing cat fever. Furthermore, this was not limited only to cats, but people were also affected by this phenomenon, and this was all due to mercury poisoning. The mercury poisoning disaster came to be known as the Minamata Disease, where the early reports of the symptoms came from the Kumamoto Prefecture in the Minamata Bay. The effects of the disease with the patients were losing the feeling in their hands and feet, causing numbness and unable to fasten and grasp things. They would stumble and not be able to walk, speaking in a childish tone. They would complain about trouble seeing, hearing, and swallowing food, and these worsened as time went on. 11 out of 30 victims died, and the mortality rate was about 36.7%. Not only were people being affected by the developing symptoms, it was later found that children being born was having birth defects through the Minamata disease. During the early 1960s, children were being born with cerebral palsy. These were children that were living in the polluted areas. These children were poisoned with methyl mercury that has seeped into the placenta during birth. Victims also suffered socially. It was assumed that the sickness was contagious so that the victims were isolated from socializing because people would avoid being around them in fear of being infected by the disease. Their way of making a living was also affected due to the contamination of the fish and seafood that the Kumamoto Prefecture heavily relied on because it was the main source of income for the location. One of the group that was mostly impacted were the fishermen and those that lived in the vicinity where fishing was the livelihood. The people that lived in Kumamoto district were the ones consuming the seafood in the area. Likewise, it was the fishermen that were heavily relying on fishing to eat and feed their families. Bruce Allen and Yuki Masami in the book about Ishimura Michiko's writing touched on a statement by an author addressing the fishermen as claiming the sea as their garden and taking ownership of what is in the sea as property. Allen and Masami begged to differ, but took it from Michiko's writing that fishermen viewed the sea as a gift from heaven and that they took kinship and reliance on the sea rather than perceiving it as property. So what led to this catastrophe? In May 1956, a small medical research group was investigating on what was thought of as a contagious disease in the small town of Minamata City under Kumamoto Prefecture. The victims were showing the signs of what we now know as Minamata Disease. The group was later joined by the Kumamoto University, and they concluded that the sickness was not a bacteria or virus disease, but was caused by a toxic substance which was contained in fish and shellfish consumed by people. The results pointed to Chiso factory that started in 1908 that was the main culprit, for it has been known to pollute the sea and having its effluents running to the Minamata Bay. Finally, in the spring of 1957, Ito Hasuo, one of the initial research group and head of the Minamata Public Center, did an experiment where he fed cats fish from the Minamata Bay, and they showed the symptoms of Minamata disease, which proved that the cause of the disease was the pollutants from the Chiso factory. The groups involved during the Minamata disease incident included the victims, Chiso factory, Kumamoto Prefecture government, and the media. The victims of the disease suffered so much. This involves physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. They were the minority in the initial discovery of the disease, for their voice was not heard. The media did not pay much attention to them. The government did very little to prevent the spread of the disease, and the Chiso factory denied their claims. The Chiso factory was the oppressor in this situation. They were considered the powerhouse in the Kumamoto prefecture. Some even claimed that the citizens had affections for the company because of their influence within the area, but they failed to take responsibility and compensate for the victims and their family for their actions. As for the Kumamoto As for the Kumamoto prefecture government, files of lawsuits have been directed to them as being irresponsible for not containing the disease. Rather than eliminating fishing during the outbreak, they chose to make it optional, which did not stop the spread but encouraged it. They failed to protect the citizens and take action. The media was nowhere to be found in the initial outbreak of the disease. This could have been because the public awareness of concern for the disease was not as strong. The media had a key role to play because they were the ones that informed the people about the issue and made the public aware of the problem. This only proved to be true once the second wave of Minamata disease happened in 1965 in Niigata, where the media coverage was vigorous and much support came to fight the outbreak. It seems that the whole It seems that the whole turnaround happened during the second outbreak of Minamata disease during the summer of 1965. Many factors played into this improvement. Experts already have much information about the disease from the initial outbreak. There were multiple pollution issues that took place and the public was more aware of pollution issues. The media was persistent in covering the story, and lastly, there were powerful allies with the victims, such as trade unions, medical cooperatives, and leftist political parties, which all led to the formation of the anti-pollution movement. These events made public more aware of the issue and resurfaced the issue of Minamata disease. Past victims were encouraged to speak out and demand compensation from the Chiso factory. This came in the form of certifications for qualifying as a victim, which gave victims financial reparations. These fight for certifications went on as Chiso were said to make the certifications more stringent to minimize the amount of compensation they had to give. Some of these fights for certifications went on until mid-1990s. My biggest My biggest takeaway for this assignment was how I became more aware of the suffering that people go through around the world in regards to pollution, the things that people go through that deserve justice. One interesting resource that I used was Ishimori Michiko's writing perspective. It was a book on analyzing Michiko's style of writing about the Minamata incident. Her writing brought together not just the rationale of the issue, but also the people, their emotions, and the artistic portrayal of what people go through really paints a vivid picture that provokes the mind. All in all, I think we should all care because what we do in our day-to-day life makes an impact. And at the end of the day, we're all connected with each other and our actions has a cause and effect some way, somehow.